Good afternoon. Thank you for attending the webinar today, sponsored by Symphony Corporation. Today's topic is on medical device integration for today's health system, more notably the plug-and-play reality or myth. My name is Deanna Kane. I'm your moderator today. I'm the Director of HIT Solutions here at Symphony Corporation. And moving on to the next slide here. All right, in just a moment, I'm going to be introducing you to Dr. Jason Keller. He is our MDI expert here at Symphony Corporation. He will be giving you an overview of medical device integration as well as the challenges of MDI, most notably, once again, shedding the plug-and-play misconceptions. Now, towards the end here, you will see that we actually have an MDI Health Check and project preparation for you in your organization. Now, as far as introducing our panelists today, we have Dr. Jason Keller. Again, he is our expert here for MDI, and he is part of Symphony Corporation. We are a global IT consulting firm with a focus on healthcare, and we've been around since 1997, providing on-site consulting and managed services offerings in our 4 delivery centers. Those delivery centers are clinical applications, ERP applications, BI, and product development. Now, Dr. Keller has worked as both a clinician and technician throughout his career. He's a trained paramedic and nurse, has a solid background, as you can see here, and his specialties include CCU and ER, software development, healthcare IT theory, microcontroller-based systems. He's written numerous applications as a clinical analyst, and we are very lucky and fortunate to have him here at Symphony Corporation. And without further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to Dr. Jason Keller. And just so you know, we will have a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar here. However, if you have a pressing question you'd like to ask, please feel free to type it in the box there, and I will fill them the best that I can. Again, we can also do this towards the end of the webinar. So thank you very much once again for being on this webinar with us today. And Dr. Keller, feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Deanna, for the wonderful introduction, and thank everybody for being here with us today. This is kind of a hot topic, and I'm really pleased to be able to go over this with you all today. So we're going to start off with just a couple of case studies. These are a couple of projects that I've worked on recently. These are health systems that are located in cities with a population of roughly 250,000 people, so a fairly good-sized city. They're very similar in nature. They both had a mixture of what we refer to as a turnkey solution, as well as some legacy solutions. And, they both had varying degrees of readiness when it came to the MDI situation. And they were both led into the MDI via their EMR. And that's a common scenario. So from there, we'll head on to the next slide. All right, so medical device integration, what it is, obviously, at this point, most people are aware of it, and it's simply, the data that we capture from our medical devices, our cardiac monitors, our ventilators, PIS monitors, what have you, and that gets fed into the EMR. So we've got some bullet points there on the benefits. Obviously, meaningful use is a big one. We've got the requirement for the MDI implementation included with the requirements for 2015, which means that for those hospitals that don't currently have an MDI system, if they want to get that in before 2015, they're going to have to hustle. Most of these implementations take as long as a year, and so to have that in time, really going to take some movement. To this point in time, about 54% of hospitals in the U.S. plan to make that move this year, incidentally. And there's lots of reasons, for developing a good, solid MDI strategy prior to actually diving into the project. And but for now, we're going to move on to some of the myths regarding plug and play and some of the challenges that various health systems face. don't worry, it's easy, and the plug-and-play mindset. Now, this is, as I mentioned, just touched on briefly earlier, very common. You know, you have an EMR vendor that's coming in, they're making their pitch, and of course, they're saying, well, you know, hey, we are ready to go with this MDI requirement, and for their part, they are, and they've got some kind of a deal worked out with a vendor, or they, you know, have some kind of a pitch in mind for one or more vendors to come in and kind of pitch their product as well. And throughout this process, the actual work that is involved in putting together the MDI piece is quite often overlooked and or underestimated. And it's a really easy thing to do, and I've seen it happen time and time again. So let's go ahead and look at the context and get into this a little bit deeper. I like to make you know, analogies between the Windows 95 plug-and-play and kind of where we're at with that plug-and-play concept in device integration today. Back in 1995, Windows 95 was revolutionary with this plug-and-play concept where you just plug in a mouse and it works. You didn't have to install drivers. You didn't have to do a bunch of configuration changes. It just worked. In Windows 95, it was still kind of a work in progress, and it didn't work great. It worked for some mouses and keyboards and things like that, but it didn't work up to what everyone kind of felt it should. And that's kind of where we're at with plug and play in the medical device area. I mean, the concept is out there. We know what we want, but it's just not. It just doesn't work that way yet, in spite of what some people think. Now, it's still out there on the horizon. You know, we've already got you know, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the medical device arena, connectivity arena. And, you know, in order for this to happen, there's a lot of challenges that need to be met, and we are really just in the early stages. There are standards that are being accepted for the basis to build the framework out that we would need to develop a plug-and-play solution. But for now, you know, the problem is just for healthcare's systems to actually get this all worked out for themselves. So basically, plug-and-play is out there. It's just not here yet. So moving on, you know, the challenges to start with, we're going to show you here what we've got here is a nice little graph that kind of shows you how it all works. This is what needs to happen in order to actually implement an MDI solution of some sort. Clear over on the right, you have a row of your medical devices, and then you have an intermediary stage, which is some sort of a device that's collecting that data, and then from that you have a server that's, again, kind of collecting the data from the intermediary devices, putting it all together, sending it on to an interface engine in most cases, because the interface engine does provide additional flexibility that's not provided in some other pieces of software. And most organizations actually have protocols that require an interface engine for any kind of an interface like this. So from there, it's on to the HL7 interface on the EMR. And that's the kind of the broker. That's where all the data is hitting the interface. That's where it's all coming in. So anything that crosses that interface then gets shuffled off to the data mapping routines within whatever EMR it is that you're using. And this is pretty universal. EMR of any kind, McKesson or Epic or PISIS or whatever you happen to have. This all works pretty much the same way. And once you have that mapping done, that is what actually drops that data into the particular cells on your flow sheet where you want it to appear for your clinician. So that's the load on a really high-level view on how that works. So moving right along. We'll get into some of the challenges. Okay, so starting off, you know, you've got undertrained, understaffed. So, you know, the vendors will come in, and the vendors use a learn-as-you-go model. So what they'll do is the vendors will come in and say, hey, you know, we'll get this set up for you. We need a person to train. And so what happens then is the vendors will come in for a couple weeks. They'll train this person. They'll sit there with them, show them how to do things. And then hopefully that person picks up enough in those 2 weeks to be able to finish the project themselves. The vendors are pretty good about offering phone support, but as time goes on, the vendors have really dropped off in the amount of support that they're giving you with the initial implementation cost, and the costs that they're charging for additional support are going up. And so this is one area where it really behooves a system to have someone that is already knowledgeable in these areas in that position that can, quickly and efficiently move through the implementation process. The next one, working in silos. As time's gone on, health systems have become more and more compartmentalized. You've got your networking folks in one silo, and you've got your server folks in another, and you've got your desktop support folks in another. And that is necessary for the way things operate on a day-to-day basis. But to continue to work in that fashion through a project obviously creates a number of problems when you're presented with something like medical device integration, which is very much a cross-discipline project. It very much is. You've got medical, biomedical services involved, and there's the electronics involved with the third-party vendor solutions, and you've got IT and the servers and the networking and the routers and the bandwidth, and there's just so much going on with this project that you kind of have to break up those silos just a bit and kind of pull people in to create a dedicated team that will be able to kind of bridge that gap that's created by dividing up your department. Now, meaningful use. This is on everybody's list. Obviously, this is a big deal. It's a regulatory requirement for 2015, and often the mindset is, well, we're going to jump in, we're going to get this done, and since it is included in the EMR section of meaningful use, in other words, when you're talking about meaningful use, the EMR is what drives the MDI implementation. And so as a result, it often kind of gets overlooked again, when you're looking at an overall process. So the challenge becomes then, you're doing all this at once, will you have time? So that's another challenge.
Dr. Keller, I did have a question that came in, actually, if I can interrupt you for
Yeah.
a moment.
Absolutely.
Thank you. What is the minimum that an organization has to do to meet meaningful use requirements for MDI?
That's a great question. I love that one. Yeah, the way it's worded, it is very vague. And so in reality, all you would really have to do is, let's say you go to your CCU and you figure out what monitors you're using in that unit, and you implement those monitors. Okay, so that's all you do. Well, that technically would meet the requirements for meaningful use for 2015 because you are taking care of all those elements that they're asking for, because they don't specify on what scale this has to occur. You can do a fairly limited implementation and still meet requirements for meaningful use.
Okay, well, and then the follow-up question, I have two on that actually, is
okay.
Number one, is staff education required? And then secondly, okay, how is this supported after the implementation is complete?
Okay, so I'll take the staff training first.
Okay.
So by staff, I'm going to kind of make an assumption here that they're talking about the clinical staff that are actually consuming the data that's being put into their EMR here. So you're talking about your nurses on the floor and some technicians and probably your CNAs, some folks like that. So you've got clinical folks. They're used to working with monitors. They're used to working with computers at this point, most of them. And so this is another piece of technology that's going to enter their world, because you have a third-party device there that has varying degrees of interactivity with it. And so there is some degree of training that goes along with this for the clinicians, and the better they know the device, the better off everybody is. the more smoothly the whole process goes. And then as for the second one, the support after the go live, what usually happens is the vendors train that one individual, and so then then they leave and everything works great for the first month or what have you, and then all of a sudden something bad happens, and the person that was trained is off duty, he's not there, and so there's a panic, and what do we do? He's not here, and then they start thinking about, well, wait, how can we only have this one person? And so that's kind of the scenario that usually happens. And so then you have that person that was trained in 2 weeks by the vendor now training a backup, and that's what you have. And so and these systems are really pretty rugged, and so typically you don't have a lot of problems, but the problem that you do run into then is you've got these 2 individuals that have a fairly basic training, but if something goes really wrong, or if a device breaks, or if a new device needs to be added, typically those individuals aren't really set up to be able to handle that type of support. They can handle basic communication problems and things like that, and little tweaks and things like that in the interface, but yeah, bigger issues they have difficulty with, and they wind up in a lot of cases bringing in consultants in order to help, or calling the vendor back up and paying them big bucks in order to fix the problem. So I hope I answered everyone's question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Keller. We'll go ahead and go on to the presentation.
Okay. All right, so on to a few more challenges. Prioritization. This is the big one. We kind of talked about. I actually touched on this a little bit there, discussing the meaningful use requirements. So, what devices do we implement? And again, it's how much time do you have, and what devices do you feel are going to benefit you the most? What gets you the biggest return on investment? That's what you're looking for. And time and again, what I see, cardiac monitors, ventilators, your critical care and perioperative areas are the ones that are the go-to places to have these implementations done. And so those are the types of devices that you see. I've done anesthesia machines and phys monitors in first-round implementations as well. Those are pretty common. Like I mentioned, ventilators, cardiac monitors. Those are probably the big 4. For first-round implementations, I'd say those are probably right up there at the top. Now, the next thing that we have here, this is required breadth and depth to execute projects. So we're talking about knowledge and expertise. So electronics and biomedical devices. Now, obviously, you've got these medical devices. You need the biomed support in order to work with those. And electronics is very helpful from that perspective, as well as from the perspective of these third-party vendors are coming in, and they have pieces of hardware that are part of their solution. And if you have someone that is knowledgeable in electronics, it makes that whole process a lot easier, because you've got devices that contain microcontrollers, and you're programming these in some cases. And so if you have someone that has that kind of background, it makes that whole process just a lot easier to understand and work with. The next thing you see there is clinical significance of your commonly chosen data points. So what that translates to is, when we were talking about the mapping and things like that, and you have to choose these data points. So, you're presented with, in some cases, when you're looking at a cardiac monitor, it will give you a pulse rate, 2 different heart rates, and an invasive line heart rate, for example. So which one of those do you want? Well, you need somebody with the clinical chops, so to speak, available to kind of be able to help you be guided through that. Sometimes it's a team, it's several different people. Sometimes it's just a subject matter expert, like a physician or a CCU nurse or something of that nature, that kind of guides you through that. Which heart rate do we want to put in here? Do we want them all, or do we only want 2? What's the difference between these, and so on and so forth. Next, you have the Windows operating system. It's ubiquitous. It's where all your servers live. Knowing Windows is going to help you in a number of ways, not the least of which is diagnosing error logs when you start having problems with communications or something like that. moving right along, the basic TCP/IP and networking knowledge, again, that's extraordinarily helpful when you start talking about, again, you've got routers in various locations that feed the rooms that these devices live in, and okay, so do you know what the symptoms of a bad router are, or a misconfigured router? Is that what's causing your problem versus a failure on the device side? So again, very helpful knowledge. HL7, it's more and more HL7 is becoming kind of a universal language for the transmission of this information. And so the more you know about HL7, the easier it is for you to be able to look at a message and say, yes, that's right, or no, it isn't. And so that's where that is. And then a basic knowledge of programming, scripting, SQL. These things all come in handy with some of the internals that are going on with some of the software. The caching, and a lot of times it's stored in a database, and just having an idea, having a background like that really helps you to understand what the software is doing behind the scenes and helps you to diagnose problems that crop up. Okay. Moving right along. I think we went backward there. Oh, there we are. Okay. So the MDI Health Check. So this is kind of a preparatory process.
I'm sorry, Dr. Keller. Can I interrupt you for one more second? I had another question that came in that I've been kind of holding on to.
Sure.
And I wanted to make sure that I'm able to field everyone's questions appropriately. So how much of, the question is, how much of my existing equipment can I use in my upcoming MDI implementation?
Okay. Another great question. So my answer to that is your mileage may vary. Typically, if you have a device that has a data output, regardless of what it is, you're going to be able to use it. Now, if it's a really obscure device, you might have to pay a little bit more to have it done if there is no driver for that, because you might have to pay the cost of the driver development for whatever third-party vendor you happen to be using. But apart from that, yeah, I mean, there's some of these vendors have just an incredible amount of supported devices, and some of these devices go back nearly 20 years. And these device libraries are growing by the day. And so, my answer to that is generally yes. Rarely do we run it across a device that's just simply not supported. The one problematic device that does come to me right off the top of my head is that the IV pump manufacturers have been pretty slow to provide a really good, reliable data output that is usable for real-time data.
Thank you. Thanks for the answer.
Yeah. Is that the only one?
Yep, that I've gotten so far. Thank you. Okay. You can feel free to continue.
Okay, great. Okay, so the MDI Health Check, as I was saying, this is kind of some preparatory work that we're doing to kind of do a health check, so to speak, of just your processes and how you approach a project. And we've got bullet points that lay out how we go about this. And it's really pretty straightforward, and there's not too much going on there that I think requires a great deal of explanation. Given what we're doing here, for example, inventory of your devices jumps out at me. Obviously, that's a necessary thing to have done early on in the process, so you can go to your vendors, and that's actually a part of the vendor selection process. Is which one of the vendors is going to support all your devices. The identification of key data points, also a really good one to have out of the way early on in the process, so you don't wind up with a bunch of arguing. Because if you're trying to select these on the fly, you're going to have a bunch of people saying, wait, I want this, I want that, and that becomes kind of a quagmire. So really, this health check is going to help you be organized, and it's going to have a lot of the keys in place that's going to prevent you from getting kind of bogged down during the process later. And I think we can head on to the next slide here. Okay, so, and this is a continuation. This is showing you the format of the MDI Health Check, what it consists of. Get, again, your inventory, you're identifying your challenges, adhering to your care standards, your technical issues, and then your business process that need improvement. And again, going through all this, and it might seem a little tedious, but again, it does save you problems down the road during the project. And quite often, as I mentioned, this is being done in tandem with an EMR implementation as well. So, that's the last thing you need in the middle of your project, is to have a big bump in the road when you've got all these resources dedicated and really don't have room for big issues like that. So, moving right along. Okay, so now we've got our 5-step process here, and number 2 is assembling the team, and this is a big one. You've got 2 types of people that are involved with an MDI rollout. You've got what we're calling a clinical advisory committee, and this is made up of clinicians, managers, risk managers, people like that we can go to and ask some of these questions, such as what are the data points we want to use, how often are we going to collect these data points, things like that. That's what these folks are here for, and so this team is really invaluable as a go-to resource, but they're not necessarily folks that are going to be involved in the process day-to-day. So you're talking, maybe a once-a-month meeting for these folks or something like that. Now, the other type is the everyday Joe, the guy that's in there working on this on a daily or regular basis. And, you've got IT and biomedical engineering staff, and in some places, you're going to have facilities engineering involved in order to do some of the mounting and the wiring that needs to be done. So, it's really crucial to get the right people assigned to this group, the right people from IT, your networking folks, and someone who can do an assay of the assets involved to make sure that you've got enough routers and so on and so forth, to make sure that this is all going to go over smoothly. Okay, then we have an initial analysis, and I kind of got into this a little bit already. The idea here is to make sure that your existing infrastructure is sufficient to support the implementation you're about to put in place. So, if you have devices that require static IPs, for example, that means, getting those allocated, making sure you've got enough wires, make sure that the wiring closet has the capacity to, add more routers if that's what's needed, and if not, where are we going to put them? What kind of bandwidth do we have? Are there existing bandwidth issues as it is? Are we going to need to, perform some sort of an upgrade on the network in order to provide more bandwidth? Room numbering is something that can become a problem if it's not consistent throughout the organization. Then you've got security protocols and firewall settings that can come into play, because in some cases there are VPN connections that are being used to transmit some of this data. You've got special rooms such as MRI that need special considerations, and so on and so forth. That analysis is kind of trying to catch all and trying to identify all the risks involved. And then we have a roadmap and the logistics. So here you're trying to kind of tweak the roadmap that you identified in the MDI Health Check, and you're going to, at this point, you're going to schedule your regular meetings, whether they're weekly, monthly, or what have you, in order to keep your stakeholders, those 2 different groups of folks we were talking about, up to date, and also to get progress reports and input that you need in order to move along. And finally, you have a wrap-up. So this is where we're going to double-check our work. We're going to make some final decisions regarding work assignments, which individuals are going to be involved with the team on a regular basis, which ones are backups, and who's not going to be there. You want to talk about your post-go live support, how you want to handle that, and the maintenance. What kind of backup equipment do you want, if any. All that stuff is tracked with a checklist to ensure that some of the easier things to forget, like communication with vendors regarding availability, shipping times, and the whole purchasing process, for example, are accounted for and planned for in advance. At that point, you're kind of ready. You're ready to dive into this project and begin your implementation.
Perfect.
And that concludes our webinar for today, and we're going to open the floor for questions.
Okay, I've got a couple coming in here, Dr. Keller, if you can bear with me. I'll try to take the first one as it came in first. Okay, how would one choose a third-party MDI technology vendor? How do you go about choosing that vendor?
Yeah, I get that one a lot. So there's a couple different ways to look at this. I mean, I get approached from the cost perspective a lot, and I understand that. I mean, that is very understandable. Cost is something that we're always concerned with in a healthcare organization. However, if you choose a vendor to save a couple bucks that doesn't support all your hardware, you're kind of tying your own hands. So from my perspective, I'm a tech. Yes, I'm a techie, but I'm also a clinician. And so, from my perspective, you really have to look at your hardware support. So which vendor is going to support all your hardware? You're going to have the fewest problems, and they're the most solid. It's the most solid equipment. Lower failure rates, so on and so forth. That's probably should be the number one thing that you're looking at, with cost being a close second. And then there are some additional factors like ease of use. I mean, how much clinician involvement does it require, and supportability. What does it take to support the product? And I think those are really the big questions to ask yourself when you're looking at a vendor. You want to try and avoid subjective questions as much as possible, because the vendor, well, these vendors are just like any other vendor that you work with in this line of work. The medical device vendors, they make it sound really super wonderful, like it's going to solve all your problems, but in reality, you get it in there and it's not quite what you thought it was going to be. So, I think I got the question answered there.
Yep, definitely. And a couple more that I've had come in here. What kind of ROI should an organization expect from an MDI implementation, would you say?
Yes, that's another big question, and it's one that has numerous answers. The return on investment for MDI, some people have estimated it in the billions of dollars per year nationwide. Some people kind of poo-poo that estimate and say it's much lower, but I don't think that there's any question that there's a positive return on investment for MDI implementation. One of the studies I looked at was, they were trying to get a feel for the average return on investment. So based on a number of factors, the big one being, of course, nursing time. They came up with a annual cost savings, rather, of $6,700 per bed in a facility. So, and I'd say that's probably a fair number, because you are saving quite a bit of nursing time. Now, granted, you're going to turn around and put that right back into bedside time, but that also increases the perception of quality in the patient's eyes, because no matter what you do, if you can put that nurse in front of that patient for more time, that patient's going to have a higher perception of quality for your facility. And so, and that's really important. And we're all starting to realize that a lot more than we did, say, 20 years ago. So that's really important. And there are other aspects to the return on investment that are, they're not quite as cut and dried as a dollar figure. You have, the perception is a perfect example. You have, you're reclaiming, apart from reclaiming that bedside time, you're also picking up granularity, for example, where a nurse might only be able to collect vital signs once every hour really efficiently. With this system, it doesn't take that nurse any more effort to collect vitals every 5 minutes. So you're able to provide a lot more data points for that physician to assess when he's looking at a patient's overall progress. And the accuracy. The accuracy, you're getting rid of transcription errors, and the final thing that comes to mind, and I'm sure there are more, but the one big thing that comes to mind is that when you're implementing this and you're tying your MDI in with your EMR, to the clinical staff, these are often indistinguishable. And so, if you're implementing an EMR and you're getting resistance, quite often a simultaneous MDI installation can actually drive acceptance of your EMR. And that's about all I have for that.
Good answer. Thank you. And how long would you say, this is another follow-up question to that, but how long would you say an implementation typically takes?
Yes. Typically, the installation time for an MDI implementation is tied to the EMR. So basically, they want everything to roll out at the same time. And so a typical EMR implementation is in the neighborhood of a year. Now, as things have evolved, it is very possible now to actually complete an MDI implementation. For example, if we're talking about, your Philips monitors and your CCUs, that kind of an implementation, if that's all you're doing, that could be done in an incredibly short amount of time by using a couple of different technologies. I, for example, have developed it's basically an EMR emulator, and it emulates the HL7 interface of pretty much every EMR out there. They're all pretty much the same. And so we're able to test all of the mappings and everything coming out of the third-party vendor software right into that application so that it's ready to roll as soon as the EMR HL7 interface goes live. And so, the time is going to vary, but, you have that. For a very small implementation, I would say you could probably get that done in 3 months, stretching out to up to 3 years for a very large hospital system that is doing implementation in phases. Typically, you have phase 1, 2, and 3. So phase 1 being your critical stuff, your CCU and perioperative things, and then you move on to things like dialysis machines, which are more difficult to implement. And then in phase 3, it's often your acute care settings, so your medical surgical floors and your data scopes and things like that that are floating around out there that get implemented last. So there's quite a bit of variance, but that, I think you get the idea of what kind of time is involved. Obviously, it's based on the amount of equipment and what all is going on.
Well, great. Thank you, Dr. Keller. At this time, I don't show any more questions. If anyone has a last-minute question, feel free to write it there in the box in the bottom right. Otherwise, we wanted to thank you once again for your time today for the webinar sponsored by Symphony Corporation and our time with you, Dr. Keller. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. This is one of my favorite topics to speak on, and I'm glad I could be here today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.